This week's video is sponsored by Incogni. In today's video I want to talk about light, not just how it transforms a scene but how it helps me to find my compositions. Over the last decade I've learned that the best photos often come from reading the light first and letting it guide where and how I shoot. So in this video I'm going to share some of my creative ideas that perhaps might inspire you when you're next shooting the great outdoors. So I have to say, for the past 4 or 5 years of this last decade shooting landscapes, I'd usually plan my photos around the forecast. I'd pick my locations based on the weather or light that I was hoping for. But more recently, I've started to move away from that approach, and it's made me much more curious. I've even found myself noticing things I wouldn't have even looked twice at before, and it's led to photos that I probably would have walked straight past. Now this shot here is a black and white photo of a spring fern, and it's a good example of that, and this is definitely something I would have just wandered right on through without giving it a second glance when I first started landscapes. This photo was taken on a recent woodland photography shoot. Now, in the past I'd only head into the woods if there was mist or fog on the forecast, because let's be honest, shooting that wide scene in the woodland in conditions like that is way easier, isn't it? I guess if you've tried woodland photography yourself, you probably know exactly what I mean. In harsh light, even the most beautiful forest can be incredibly tricky to photograph. The contrast between the light and shadow can be overwhelming at times, and the end result often feels quite messy, doesn't it? The thing is, at least where I live, fog is really hard to predict, and back then a lot of my early morning starts chasing mist would end in disappointment, which, let's face it, none of us really want from our photography, do we? Now, I bring this up because honestly, one of the main reasons I used to come home feeling disappointed was that I didn't adapt to the conditions. I'd check the forecast, pick a location, and if the weather didn't play ball, the whole shoot felt like a bit of a write-off. I'd still take the shots that I had in mind, but most of the time they didn't live up to what I imagined they would, and when that happened, it just felt like a bit of a failure. Now, over the past 5 years or so, my approach has definitely changed. These days, I don't rely on the forecast as much. I still take a look at it, of course, but I try to focus more on being creative with whatever conditions that I've got, rather than waiting for the perfect ones to come along, if that makes sense. And honestly, that shift has completely changed the kind of photos I take and how I think about working with light. Now, first off, I just want to say I really don't believe there's such a thing as bad light, only photos that don't work with it. And what I mean by that is there are good photos to be made in any type of light. You just need the right subject or creative approach to make it work. So with that in mind, I want to talk about a few lighting conditions that, as landscape photographers, we often see as less than ideal, and how we can actually work with them instead of fighting against them. So let's start with one of the most challenging, and that is harsh light, I think. Now, I often catch myself saying something like, the light's too harsh right now, but what I really mean is I haven't yet found a subject that suits the light. And harsh light can be really tricky, can't it? The dynamic range gets tough to manage, and those strong shadows can often feel quite overwhelming and distracting, and sometimes even a bit ugly. So what do I do, when the light is like that? Well, my first instinct is to narrow my field of view. I start looking for areas where the light is a little bit softer and more controlled. I think the tighter the composition, the easier it is to manage the contrast. And sometimes that even means reaching for a macro lens and going really close. That black and white fern is probably quite a good example. The dappled light interacts with the subject in a way that I find pleasing when the wider scene was cluttered and chaotic. Now, one of the things I'm always on the lookout for in harsh light conditions is reflected light. So let's say you're in a shady spot, but the sun's hitting a cliff face nearby. Some of that softer reflected light might bounce back down into your scene and give it a completely different quality. And I've shown this shot quite a few times before, but I think maybe it's quite a good example of this. The red cliffs in front of me were bouncing warm light onto that flowing water on the beach, and it gave the whole scene a beautiful rusty glow. And that shell was just a nice, simple subject to anchor the frame. I think the light really did most of the work. You know, I think figuring out ways to work in tricky light like this has been a real game changer for me. And there's lots more, to talk about in this video that will hopefully help you out. But lately, I've been dealing with another kind of challenge. So over the past year, I've started getting way more spam emails and random calls than before. So much so that I actually missed a few important messages hidden in amongst all of the clutter, which ended up costing me some pretty big opportunities. Now, if you've been seeing more junk mail or scam calls lately, it's not a random thing. It's because your personal data is being collected and sold by data brokers. And these companies legally gather everything from your name, your email address, shopping habits, even your browsing history. And it's great to have Incogni sponsoring this video because I had no idea this sort of thing went on. So Incogni reaches out to these data brokers for you and demands your personal info gets removed from their databases. If you take a look at my Incogni dashboard here, you can see 49 removal requests have been sent to data brokers in the past month. 42 have been completed and 7 are in progress, saving me 31 hours, 30 minutes if I was to do it myself. Now, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it is completely risk-free to try. So, if you want to take back your privacy, use the link in my video description, which is incogni.com/Ian Worth for a 60% off an annual plan. So big thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this week's video. So flat light has definitely been another nemesis of mine in the past, and I've lost count of how many times I've said to myself, well, the light's really flat here and there's definitely nothing to shoot. But just like with harsh light, it's really about matching the subject to the conditions. And I actually think there's loads of creative opportunities when the light is flat. And just to be clear, by flat light, what I mean is those times when there's very even spread of light across the scene, usually because of heavy or thick cloud cover. And personally, I find it easier to shoot in flat conditions when I'm near water. So even on the, say, greyest of days, oceans, rivers and lakes can give a lovely reflective light source that brings some contrast into an otherwise dull scene. Water reflects light, doesn't it? So if you can line that up with dark rocks or some textured surfaces, you can get some really striking results. I also think black and white photography works really well in these situations as well, especially with longer exposures. The motion adds contrast not just in the light, but also in texture as well. When I'm inland, I'll usually narrow my field of view again. And I think flat light is actually really good for picking out intimate scenes like, say, leaf litter, patterns in rocks, or even abstract shots. This photo here was taken on an overcast day. I set the camera up on a tripod, added an ND filter, slowed the shutter to about 1/3 of a second, and then gently moved the camera upwards during the exposure. And that little bit of motion blur created a lovely painterly effect that I really like. Now, I enjoy this type of photography because, you never quite know what you're going to get, do you, until you've taken the shot and then reviewed it. And I think there's something really exciting about that unpredictability. Now, one other thing worth thinking about here is, especially actually when the light is flat, is you can still find directional light. And woodland is a great example of this. Even on overcast days, a small break in the canopy can just let in enough light to create a new direction of light, totally different from where the sun actually is. And that little patch of light might help you spot a subject that's being backlit or sidelit, even if you're facing away from the sun. It's subtle, but it actually can make all of the difference to finding a composition that works well. So we've looked at 2 different types of light that can make shooting the wider landscape a bit tricky, but now I want to talk about 2 of my favourite kinds of light for capturing big views and more expansive scenes. And just a quick note, if you're interested in diving a bit deeper into how I approach light in my own photography, I've actually put together a 30-page guidebook all about it. And it's completely free when you sign up to my photography newsletter, which goes out every week. So if that sounds helpful or inspiring, there is a link down in the video description. Feel free to check it out. So first up is side light, and honestly, if I could only choose one type of light, it would be this, especially when the sun is low in the sky. And that combination of direction and angle can work beautifully for so many different scenes. So let's start with the direction. So side light, obviously, as the name suggests, the light is coming from the side, isn't it? And that has a couple of benefits. First, the light source is usually out of frame, which makes it much easier to expose for the landscape. And second, it helps create a three-dimensional feel in the photo, because you get that nice mix of light and shadow. I think it's that interplay between the two that really adds depth. You know, think of a simple tree trunk. If there's light hitting it from the side, one half is lit and the other half is in shadow, and that makes it look rounded. If the light was coming straight at it, straight at the subject, that shape can get lost and it can feel very flat. Now, one of the big challenges in landscape photography is trying to make a flat image feel like it has depth, and side light really can help with that. Now, the angle is the other part of it, and by that I mean how high or how low the light is in the sky. And the lower the sun, the softer and often warmer the light becomes. And that low angled light is something a lot of outdoor photographers are always hoping for. When these two things come together, it can really transform a landscape. You get longer shadows, more visible texture, and the warm light often helps to balance out other colours, especially on clear blue sky days. So next up, we've got backlighting, or shooting straight into the light, and it's another one of my favourite types of light to work with. And it can be great for all different scenes. You know, you can use it for rim lighting smaller subjects, which helps them stand out from the background, or for creating silhouettes. And both are brilliant for getting creative and trying something a bit different. Now, shooting into the light does come with a few challenges. Exposure, one of the big ones, obviously. When you're facing the light, you know, you're often bracketing your photos because you're trying to capture more tones than the camera can record itself in a single shot. So yeah, I often find myself bracketing more often when the light source is coming straight at me. Another thing to watch out for is lens flare as well, and this is when the sun hits your lens directly and it can create flares that might spoil your photo. Some people really like flare, and it can be a creative tool in itself, but if I'm shooting a wide landscape scene, it's usually something I'm trying to avoid. Now, there are a couple of ways to reduce flare. One is to partially block the sun out, so you could use a rock or a tree or something like that and wait until the sun just dips behind it, and that will help, you know, cut down on the harsh light hitting the lens. Another little trick I use is to take two shots of the full scene, one with my finger blocking out the sun. I then blend the two later to remove the lens flare in the foreground. It's a super simple trick, and it saved a few shots for me over the years. It's well worth trying. Now, of course, there are loads of other types of light, isn't there? And like I mentioned earlier, I've got a lot more detail in my free guidebook, which you'll find linked below. But I would love to hear what kind of light you enjoy shooting most. How do you approach it? You know, let me know in the comments, because I always enjoy reading your comments, and it really does help me understand what kind of videos resonate with you, which gives me ideas for future content as well. Now, as I've said throughout this video, these are just things that resonate with me personally. There's no hard rules here, and I never want to tell anyone how they should or shouldn't approach their own photography. But I do hope you found this video helpful, or maybe even a little bit inspiring in some way. If you enjoyed it, feel free to give it a like, because that really does help me out. And the video up here somewhere will take you to another one you might find useful. And over on the other side is that guidebook on light as well, if you fancy checking it out. Anyway, until next week, take care.